By 1958, the ocean liner was already dying. For the first time, more passengers crossed the Atlantic by air rather than by sea. The monumental rise in air travel showed no signs of slowing, and the jet age made the great ocean liners, once considered the pinnacle of innovation in engineering, feel old-fashioned and incredibly slow. But that same year, the Italian line prepared to make a huge bet on the future of ocean travel. For decades, the company relied on the Vulcania and the Saturnia, each built in the late 1920s. They would turn replacing these aging intermediate liners into an opportunity to build two modern and stylish superliners that would dominate transatlantic travel, or so they hoped. Their ambitions were misplaced, and these great white superliners would prove to be one of the greatest follies in the history of ocean travel. By the mid-1950s, the Italian line was at a crossroads. They began the decade with the introduction of the Andrea Doria and the Cristoforo Colombo, two reasonably large and technologically modern ships. The duo was intended to re-establish the company after their devastating losses sustained during World War II, which left the company with just 4 aging intermediate liners. Initially, the Andrea Doria and Cristoforo Colombo seemed to live up to expectations, offering a modern, stylish, and luxurious alternative to the more traditional liners offered by competitors like Cunard and the French line. But that all changed in 1956 when the Andrea Doria collided with the Swedish liner Stockholm near Nantucket. While passenger deaths were minimal and the rescue was largely heralded as a success, the incident was one of the most widely covered peacetime maritime disasters since the loss of the RMS Titanic. The Italian line was never quite able to match the luster they enjoyed during that brief period before the disaster. Nonetheless, a new, slightly larger, and more advanced liner was ordered to replace the Andrea Doria and serve alongside the Cristoforo Colombo on the North Atlantic. Laid down in 1958, the Leonardo da Vinci sailed her maiden voyage on June 30th, 1960. While she was still under construction, attention at the company shifted to the aging liners that made up the rest of their fleet. The 24,000-ton MS Saturnia and MS Vulcania entered service in 1927 and 1928. While both liners had long and colorful careers, it was clear by 1958 that they were both reaching the end of their lifespans. While it's easy to assume that shipbuilding would have been in decline in the late 1950s, the decade actually saw a flurry of innovation and productivity. Italy was in the middle of a somewhat miraculous economic recovery, and Italian shipyards were some of the most productive in Europe at the time. Although passengers were increasingly choosing air travel when crossing the Atlantic, the trend was slower to take hold on the Mediterranean routes that the Italian line dominated. This economic boom, and the false sense that air travel wouldn't overtake their home routes, the Italian line seized the opportunity to replace their aging liners with 2 new superliners. The projects were also seen as a great opportunity to create more jobs at Italian shipyards. Plans, which originally called for liners similar in size and scope to the 33,340-ton Leonardo da Vinci, quickly ballooned into vessels that would each exceed 45,000 tons. While unique and technologically advanced, these designs would yield 2 liners poorly suited to serve the changing world they would eventually encounter. Two Italian shipbuilders were tasked with developing designs for the Italian line's new flagships: Ansaldo near Genoa and Cantieri Riuniti del Adriatico, or CRDA in Trieste. CRDA produced plans that were similar to another project they were developing around the same time for a liner called the Oceanic, built for the home lines and launched in 1963. These designs called for versatile liners that could easily transition between transatlantic service and cruising. Ansaldo, on the other hand, generated a far more traditional design that amounted essentially to a larger, two-funneled version of the Leonardo da Vinci, a liner the shipyard launched at the end of 1958. The Italian line, perhaps feeling confident in a design they were already familiar with, decided to move forward with Ansaldo's traditional ocean liner design. It's worth noting that the versatility of CRDA's Oceanic made her easy to convert into a cruise ship, and she enjoyed a long and successful career with multiple owners before she was finally scrapped in 2012. On September 8, 1960, the first keel plates of hull number 1577, what would soon become the Michelangelo, were laid down at Ansaldo. That same day, the first keel plates of hull number 1864, which would soon become the Raffaello, were laid down at CRDA. They were the largest liners built in Italy since the Rex was constructed by Ansaldo 30 years before. Almost immediately, the projects faced numerous delays due to shortages of steel and skilled labor. These issues were compounded by a series of labor strikes. Construction was meant to coincide with the Leonardo da Vinci's maiden voyage in June 1960, but this deadline was the first of many that would be missed. Despite the delays, on September 16, 1962, the hull of the Michelangelo was ready to launch. A crowd of 100,000 spectators gathered to watch the ceremony. She was christened by Donna Laura Segni, the wife of Italy's president at the time. In perhaps a bit of foreshadowing, the event was celebrated with a flyover from Italian Air Force jets. The Raffaello, facing even worse delays, was not launched until March 24, 1963. As the two ships were fitted out, it was clear that their superstructures closely followed the design of the Leonardo da Vinci, but they differed significantly in their construction. Unlike the Da Vinci, the superstructures of these new superliners were constructed entirely out of 850 tons of aluminum in order to save weight. But the biggest difference between these new liners and their predecessor was undoubtedly their highly unique funnel design. These, say it with me, weird-ass funnels were the result of extensive research by teams at Turin Polytechnic. They were tasked with developing a design that would most efficiently exhaust smoke and keep it from blowing onto the ship's sun decks. Their research yielded narrow stovepipes topped with large soot shields that would prevent smoke from getting pulled down. These structures were supported by latticework, reminiscent of pre-World War II American battleships, that allowed air to easily flow over the ship. Love them or hate them, these designs were effective at keeping smoke away from their sun decks, and proved instantly recognizable. They would feature heavily in Italian line advertising for years to come. While nearly identical on the outside, the Michelangelo and Raffaello featured unique interior designs. The only major exterior difference was the arrangement of their swimming pools. Michelangelo's interiors were generally more traditional and subdued, with deep red, brown, and black color palettes. The Raffaello, on the other hand, featured edgier designs with pale tones and blue accents. Both ships featured accommodations for 1,775 passengers, divided into 3 classes, and were operated by a crew of 720. One confusing design choice that would go on to erode their popularity: these ships had no portholes installed below their cabin deck. This meant that the vast majority of staterooms had no porthole for light or ventilation. When completed, the SS Michelangelo measured 906 feet, or 276 meters in length, with a beam of just under 99 feet, or 30 meters, and came in at 45,911 gross registered tons. She was powered by geared turbines that drove 2 propellers, achieving a 26.5 knot service speed. Both ships were large and beautiful, but construction delays meant that they wouldn't enter service until mid-1965, right when dwindling passenger numbers forced many major rivals to retire many of the great legacy ocean liners. The Michelangelo and Raffaello were too late by more than a decade. Their problems would only grow worse as they began their sea trials. The Michelangelo began her sea trials on March 11, 1965, a full 4.5 years after her first keel plate was laid down. As she was brought up to speed, two issues became immediately clear. When her engineer continued to open up her turbine steam valve, her RPM wouldn't increase, preventing her from reaching her full service speed. Even worse, her aft section was plagued with intense vibrations. One crew member later said that her crew dining room shook like a belly dancer. After investigating, Ansaldo's management couldn't find the source of the problem. Out of sheer desperation, they sought the help of Niccolo Costanzi, a director from CRDA, the yard building the Raffaello. Awkwardly, they were also the firm whose proposed design for the liners was rejected. After observing the Michelangelo from a distance, Costanzi was unable to determine the cause of the issue. To get a closer look, he lowered himself from the ship's stern in a flimsy rattan basket as the liner attempted another high-speed trial. Based on its observations, Costanzi concluded that alterations were needed to the ship's propellers and shaft tubes. But the Michelangelo's maiden voyage had already been publicized, and there wouldn't be time to implement these changes. The Raffaello, on the other hand, was a few months behind schedule, giving her builders at CRDA time to fix the issue. With these improvements, the Raffaello performed her sea trials beautifully and recorded a top speed of 31.5 knots, making her the fastest Italian liner of all time. Michelangelo wouldn't see these improvements until her first dry docking in January 1966, after which she would go on to beat her sister with a speed of 31.59 knots, making her the fifth fastest passenger liner in the world at the time. Despite her issues, the Michelangelo sailed her maiden voyage on May 12, 1965, with 1,495 passengers. Her castoff was celebrated with the release of 1,000 white doves. Overall, her maiden voyage was considered a great success, and she sailed into New York Harbor on May 20th to rave reviews. The Raffaello sailed her maiden voyage 3 months later in July. With successful maiden voyages marked by positive press and excitement over the glamorous and luxurious designs, the Michelangelo and Raffaello seemed to be on the verge of a successful and profitable career. But after a brief period of success, their popularity quickly began to fade. By the mid-1960s, air travel was the dominant mode of transportation, even on the Mediterranean routes. Beauty and glamour couldn't hide the fact that the Michelangelo and Raffaello were an outdated mode of transportation. Soon, this folly would become painfully clear. While both ships would soon struggle to attract passengers, in their early years, the Michelangelo and Raffaello were a popular choice for fashionable travelers. The wealthy, movie stars, and even royalty frequently sailed on both liners. But misfortune wasn't far away. In October 1965, the Raffaello suffered an engine room fire while at sea. It took her crew 90 minutes to bring the blaze under control. Her starboard screw and stabilizers were both damaged, causing the ship to lurch violently, resulting in 56 minor injuries. Fortunately, the ship was designed with 2 separate engine rooms, and she was able to reverse course and limp into Genoa for repairs. But worse was yet to come for the Michelangelo. On April 12, 1966, during a routine transatlantic crossing, the liner sailed into a major storm. Out of an abundance of caution, Captain Saletti ordered passengers in cabins located in the ship's forward superstructure to move to interior cabins. Despite the weather, the Michelangelo performed well, but air intakes near her bow were damaged. The ship was maneuvered to provide shelter from the oncoming wind and waves, while crew members were sent to repair the damage. At the same time, with the storm clearing, passengers were allowed to return to their cabins in the forward superstructure. One couple, Mr. and Mrs. Berndt, and another passenger, Mr. Steinbeck, returned to their forward cabins. A small handful of off-duty crew members also gathered in an unoccupied cabin, eager to catch a glimpse of the storm. Just after the repairs were completed, the Michelangelo turned to resume her voyage to New York. But just after completing the maneuver, the liner's bow plunged down into an unusually deep trough. This was followed by a massive wall of water, at least 70 feet or 21 meters high, that towered over the ship before crashing down on her bow and superstructure. The force of the water tore into her aluminum superstructure and ripped it open like a can opener. Mr. Steinbeck was killed instantly. Mr. Burnt would die later from his injuries, as would another young crew member. Several other passengers and crew were injured by the violent collision. One crew member with a fractured skull had to be airlifted by the US Coast Guard. Despite the significant damage to her bridge, the ship's vital equipment emerged unscathed. After a few moments of confusion, temporary repairs were made and the Michelangelo was able to resume her voyage. She limped into New York on April 16th with her flag flying at half-mast. Damage to the ship was severe, mainly due to her aluminum superstructure, which proved inadequate for the forces of the North Atlantic. Both the Michelangelo and the Raffaello had their superstructures reinforced with steel, and other liners like the SS United States and the SS France also had their aluminum superstructures reinforced after the incident. Proving the strength of these reinforcements and the quality of her design, the Michelangelo faced another hurricane-force storm the following year. She performed beautifully and emerged undamaged. By the 1970s, both the Michelangelo and the Raffaello struggled to attract passengers. The Raffaello, always seen as the lesser of the two ships, was devoted almost exclusively to cruising, while the Michelangelo maintained a transatlantic service. But as the years went on, even she was sent on more and more cruises in the Mediterranean and the Caribbean. While at first glance, the Michelangelo looks like she would make an ideal cruise ship, her cruises, and the cruises offered by her sister, consistently proved less popular than many competitors. Their traditional, three-class ocean liner design didn't translate well to the laid-back atmosphere cruise passengers expected. The lack of cabins with portholes made it all the more difficult, and their size limited their access to many popular cruise ports. The Italian line was bleeding money, and the large and inefficient liners became a major burden. The situation became untenable after the 1973 oil crisis sent the cost of fuel skyrocketing. It's estimated that by the end of their careers, 100 million lira per day, or about $151,500, were being paid by the Italian government to keep the ships in operation. In 1975, the government announced that it would stop supporting the liners. Without these funds, the end was only months away. Raffaello was quietly withdrawn from service in April 1975, and the Michelangelo sailed her final voyage with crater ceremony only a few months later in July. Artwork was promptly removed, and both liners were laid up in Porto Venere, where they waited for an interested buyer. Knut Kloster, of the Norwegian cruise line, briefly expressed interest, but he soon fell in love with the recently retired SS France and selected her to become his new cruise ship, the SS Norway. Rumors circulated that another Italian company, the Home Lines, were considering purchasing the liners, but the sale was said to have been blocked because the Italian line didn't want to see their former flagships that they had invested in so heavily sailing under another Italian flag. Finally, on December 12, 1976, the liners were purchased for $35 million by the Imperial Iranian Navy, who intended to use them as floating barracks. They were soon transported to Iran, and both ships saw a brief period of interest in their new home country, as their ballrooms were used to host lavish parties. But they soon fell out of use, and by the 1980s, both ships were sitting unused and rotting away. Plans came and went to convert them into cruise ships, but in 1979, the ships were heavily looted in the Iranian Revolution. Then, in 1983, The Raffaello became a target in the Iran-Iraq War. She was struck by several missiles and partially sank, echoing the fate of the wrecks so many years before. Her wreck has never been fully scrapped, and remnants remain to this day. The Michelangelo survived, but she sat idle for nearly a full decade before she finally was scrapped in 1991, putting an end to two of the last purpose-built ocean liners ever to serve on the Atlantic. While the Michelangelo and Raffaello are today remembered mostly as foolish misadventures, their passengers and crews looked back at the great Italian liners with fond nostalgia. For passengers, even those in tourist class, the Michelangelo and Raffaello offered one last taste of the quiet ease of ocean travel, free from the hustle and bustle of modern travel, when one was allowed to relax and enjoy the journey just as much as the destination. For their crews, both were generally considered happy ships that offered a decent pay and a pleasant career at sea. After retirement, their crew were scattered among cargo and cruise ships and hotels on land. Nothing that quite lived up to the magic of those great white liners that only just missed their moment in the sun. Thank you so much for watching. Which is your favorite, the more traditional Michelangelo or the edgier but overshadowed Raffaello? Let me know in the comments down below. If you like this video, support the channel by hitting that like button and subscribing for more stories like this one. I'd like to give a special shout out to my supporters on Patreon. I heard they all just took a pottery class together and discovered an untapped natural talent for throwing clay. That's awesome. Alright crew, that's all I've got. Until the next one, be nice to people.